Welcome back to the Cast podcast. That's redundant. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with my co-host, Ben Bateman.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show. Exciting week. I'm hyped to be here.
We are in the midst of Zendikar Rising previews. A bunch of new cards to be talked about. The big thing is, and it's a little bit of a follow-up conversation from 2 to 3 weeks ago when we had a big conversation on people should be playing more lands in their decks, or how many lands should one play in a commander deck or a modern deck or a legacy deck or a standard deck or a historic deck, etc. And how people should maybe be playing more than they are. And literally like a week later, Zendikar Rising rolls through, and its main mechanic is that it's added flip cards. And apparently we've heard that flip cards will be a theme for the year, but Zendikar's version of flip cards is one side is always a land, and you can choose. So what the theme for the year is every set in the so Zendikar Rising, Kaldheim, and Strixhaven will all have flip cards that you get to decide as you play them which side you play. So likely Strixhaven is going to be a lot of one side's an instant, one side's a sorcery, or like spell effects because it's going to be wizard themed, or maybe every side's a wizard and then every other side is a instant or sorcery, which will be cool, something along those lines. I can imagine. I have no idea what Kaldheim is. I'm expecting snowy things, but who knows? And then in this set, it's lands. So every flip card on one side, at least, you get to play a land card, and some of them come to play untapped, some of them come to play untapped sometimes, some of them coming to play tapped. And there's a lot of powerful ones, and they all do cool things. We want to kind of talk about how does this work in deck building conceptually, and how we both feel about it, and then talk a little bit about each card individually as part of kind of the set review. So instead of doing set reviews, we're going to kind of talk about each more of a holistic subject matter around the set, a few episodes in a row. And so we'll go over individual cards, and then if we're lucky and we have time, we're also going to do a little bit deep dive on one of the other themes of the set, which is one of the 4 tribes, and that is rogues, which Ben's
so freaking
Ben's super stoked on.
So hyped on. There's a couple cards that have been spoiled that look amazing. A big time shout out to all of our patrons. Big time pinky salute, pinky out to all the nobles of House Modern. Are these here? Yep. And thank you so much. We hang with you guys for a few minutes. We've been a little on hold with that mechanic on the Patreon these last couple weeks. Schedules have been a little weird, but we are going to be expanding the Patreon with some new cool stuff very soon. So it's actually a good time to get in. But a big time thank you to everybody who has supported all of what we do. It means a lot to us.
And stuff that you get exclusive on the Patreon. So every week, the fully unedited version of the podcast is released on the Patreon. So that has no editing. You get a little bit of a post credits though. If there's any weird mistakes we make, any jokes that we feel like are just like long tangents that shouldn't be released. You also get the episode early, so it's unedited. So there's no card files, but you get everything edited in early. You also are now getting a movie talk. So we're doing just like, because me and Ben can't help ourselves, we just at the beginning of every one where like I've been trying to make an effort to talk about movies. So you get Kess and Ben movie talk as part of that raw feed, exclusive to the patron. You also on the you get exclusive access to the MMCast Discord. So the MMCast Discord is now exclusive to patrons and or Twitch subscribers only. So if you're one of those two groups, you get access and get to be kind of a more of exclusive, cool hangout. Slowly, I'm probably going to be modifying it to be like kind of play on like the like a noble house kind of situation, like a cool secret club. So that'll be fun. And then, so thank you so much, everybody. And then, cool. Gonna get in the episode. So.
Sweet.
I'm starting from the bottom up. So we're going to start with the uncommons, and we'll just kind of touch upon some of them. And Ben, pass if you don't think they're worth talking about. Well, I guess before we get into individual cards, that's a preview for later. Before we get in there, these cards in general, and I think we'll save the dual lands conversation for when we get to them, because I think that's a different conversation. But for the half spell, half land, are they like? What do you think? Where are you at on like? Oh, should we be playing? Like, should we now just go up to? Should they replace lands? Can you go down to 20 lands now because 4 of them could be one of these cards? Should we be all going up to 30 lands, but counting these as those lands? Where do you fall on?
I think it distinctly depends on the format. Because like, okay, so let's just talk format to format, right? There's few to no situations that in Vintage or in Legacy you would play a tapped land. It almost would never happen. Like there are certain situations where you would because it's a very, very particular deck or like the land does something. But for the most part, in the
like
most powerful,
right? Like,
yeah, the most powerful formats don't play tapped lands, period. They're so low to the ground. The efficiency is so high. It wouldn't really matter what you were getting on the other side of a tapped land. It almost wouldn't matter. It would have to be like a tap. You know what I'm saying? So then you get into like the mid-level formats in terms of power level. And it's like Modern and Pioneer. And I think that there's a situation where Pioneer, you would play tapped lands. Modern, you don't really play tapped lands in Modern unless you're talking about like the bounce lands or something like that, and those aren't even really technically tapped lands.
But like creature lands have been played historically in Modern since the very beginning, and I think these are very comparable to those creature lands. And then also I think the other land that these feel closest to are cycling lands, right?
Yeah, I think the cycling lands for sure, but again, like those have a function beyond being on the battlefield that makes them worthwhile. Those creature lands that you're talking about are definitely the notable exception in Modern, like right, like Celestial Colonnade, Raging Ravine. These are like some of the most played lands ever in Modern's history. Mm-hmm. So that's like a very, very particular class of land. Now, if you start to move into and I think Commander, I would let you speak on this, but I think there's a little bit more patience in Commander. So you could play a tap land in Commander. I think, especially these big spells that have X's involved.
So there's a big debate on that. So in Commander, a lot of people believe. So like Vince from Pleasant Kenobi, the YouTube channel, he's gone on record, and I think has a video all about it, on how like people in Commander should stop playing tap lands, just in general, right? Like, in fact, for him, the cost in Commander is much higher than even say something like Modern, because you're getting 1 out of 4 turns, and so if you're losing the ability to cast a spell because you have to play a tapped land, that tapped land better be worth a spell. Versus in Modern, where like if I have to play a tapped land, the sequentialness of the turn order and the fact that like I can like play it as a 1-drop, and then on turn 3, if I need to play a tap land, I can keep counter magic open, right? There's like ways to play with tap lands in that format that you can capitalize on playing low efficiency spells. So many of your spells in Modern are 1 and 2 drops that a tap land isn't nearly as high of a cost as in Commander, where every spell is more expensive. So the more expensive your spells from his perspective, the less tap lands you should be playing. Now I disagree, but I like, and we kind of talked this about in the land episode, right? Where I'm more of the belief that tapped lands are worth playing but in 2 ways. One, they have to be gaining you enough value to play, right? And I think the Temple is the perfect middle ground, or the perfect bottom, right? A Temple is the least amount that I'm willing to play a land that comes into play tapped. You have to be doing something more than a Temple for me really to be worth playing it. And then the second thing was that I think also people aren't playing enough lands, right? Like I think if you're able to go up to 30 lands is an extreme case, but 30 lands in Modern, or 45 lands or 40 lands in Commander, 40 lands, but like the next 5 cards are like Soul Ring plus Mana Rocks. You're able to take advantage. Like the way to do that is to make it so when you draw some of these lands, or if you get mana flooded, your lands are doing work for you, which like obviously these cards, when we get into them, are an option there. But cycle lands, the man lands or creature lands, the Tolaria West is a favorite one for me. Even stuff that comes into play untapped, like Academy Ruins, Field of the Dead. Sorry, not Field of the Dead. Field of destroys the land.
Field of Ruin.
Field of Ruin. Yeah. Field of Ruin. Me mixing up Field of the Dead and Field of Ruin got me banned on Reddit once. Do you know that? Do you know that story? When we previewed Field of Ruin, I accidentally posted our preview episode on Reddit as Field of the Dead previewed in that set, and they banned me for 6 months because they thought I was trolling. They thought it was a troll post and not me, Alex Kessler, being unable to keep cards straight. Which, in their defense, I did post Field of the Dead.
It's a shortcoming of yours in the Magic world. I think to add to your point, you were talking about sort of those where you jump from what is the reasonable number of lands to what feels like that next number. I think what's interesting about this conversation is that we need to talk about these cards first and foremost for standard, not because I think we need to dive deep into standard, but that's what these are being designed for. So, and the opportunity cost there in standard is totally different than all the other formats we're talking about. Now, I do think historic and Highlander Gauntlet, our format we play, are interesting conversations to have also, because I think these do slot into there in a very sort of interesting power level. But when it comes to like, you know, talking about the power of a tapped land, I mean, the triomes are all over standard. And I would argue that those triomes are very valid cards to play in Commander. A, because they cycle, and B, because fetch lands get you 3 colors often. And like, you just get it instead of the other land end of turn if you don't need the other color. So, or if you don't need it. So I think that's like where a tap land becomes the most relevant. But I'm looking at a lot of these cards, and I think we're going to see this. This would be my guess, because anytime there's a new mechanic that's previewed like this, or a new type of card, there's always a little bit of a figuring out how powerful these things really are. Yeah. Most of the uncommons I don't think are going to be too good. There will be a mythic or a rare that becomes like ubiquitous in the standard format, and there probably will be one of these that becomes a staple of like modern, because it's just like the power level is so high in the right deck, is my guess. And we'll see if we can identify which one it is tonight on the show.
So on the opposite end of that tech, I think this is a companion level, power level mechanic.
Really?
I think it won't be as problematic as companion, because the gameplay is not going to be as problematic, right? Like, it's like the worst case scenario is that just decks are playing these all over the place, but like that's what companion had, right? Like, every deck in the format had to play these cards, and that's the worst case scenario here. The difference here is that there's like spells that turn into lands versus companion, where it's like every turn 3 Luros is in play, and every turn 4 Urian's in play, right? Like I don't think it's going to be as negative of an effect as companion, but I think it is going to be as ubiquitously powerful. I think that like the amount of decks that want to take advantage of cards that can be lands, but then are also spells, and there's enough generically powerful stuff like Tangled Florahedron, which is the like 2-mana Llanowar Elf, that like there's enough like generically powerful things that are worth considering for most decks. And we'll go through on a card by card basis. And obviously we're not even done with spoilers, so there might be future previews of these. But I think that the ability to either cut down on lands for interaction for stuff like burn, that like they get a generic card that is going to be good, or they just play this land tapped, so they can go down on lands. Or for decks that want to play more lands, like a control deck that wants to always win the counter war, but then like late game also gets access to a massive board wipe or a threat or a card draw engine, makes them seem like they're going to be played everywhere. And you know, some of the cards I just named are the ones that come into play untapped. So the get started, number 1, and it's going to be reverse alphabetical, reverse.
Before we get started, I just want to add to your point that you're talking about companion level, power level. And I think something for anybody who's listening to this show, maybe for the first time, or possibly if you guys are returning, just like sort of to evaluate what that means. And you can clarify if I'm wrong here. But the idea with that is that because of its power level, when before the change with companions, you sort of were forced into a situation where all decks had to play a companion, because the advantage you were getting for like almost no downside was so high. You just sort of had to do it. And to some degree, like in best of 1 on historic, there's a similar situation, because why do you care about having like every deck should have a companion in best of 1? Because like, why wouldn't you? You just get this thing. And I do think that to some degree what you're saying, I agree with you in terms of these cards will become ubiquitous in many formats for that same reason, that like the cost is so low. But I don't think it'll be the same thing, because even at their peak, there are like burn, for instance, modern burn. There's almost no situation where modern burn is going to be interested in playing a tapped land, and the one you can pay 3 life, which we're going to get to, I don't know if is good enough. So it's like a deck like Burn. I don't know if there's a high enough quality card so far to make Burn stand out, but we will get there. So I think I would rank it a little below. I do expect it'll become ubiquitous, but I don't think it's going to be powerful on the same level.
Okay. I guess like I'm even looking at the Song of Mad Treachery, and I would like think about putting that in a mono red aggressive deck. Like, yeah, let's talk. Let's talk through. So the first one to really talk about, and I mentioned it right before this, so it's cool that we're getting right into it, is Tangled Florahedron. 1 and a green, elemental, tap, make 1 green mana. It's a 1/1. And then on the other side, it's a forest it's a green producing land that enters the battlefield tap. Now, this card, I was looking at my like Twitter analytics, And when this artwork was previewed, I like tweeted it out being like, I would protect this boy with my life because he's this cute little hedron plant. It was like one of the top interacted picture tweets of the last like 6 months, which is cool. I love this guy. I want to protect him. He's so cute with his flowers. I do think this is like pretty playable, right? Like I think the biggest issue here is it's too redundant.
Yeah, so I think where I would sound off on the cards you just mentioned so far, just an interesting thought is this is definitely the most powerful of these first four easy, right? This card's a real card. The one thing about this card that's interesting is like it doesn't playing a land or elf on turn 2 is totally fine. Like I'm not saying it's bad by any means, but what you get out of drawing this card later in the game is really not great.
Right.
It's just fine. Like you're not really getting that much of an advantage to be a turn slower with an elf on turn 1 that can't cast a different elf if you have it as like one of your 2 lands. Mm-hmm. Like it could actually slow you down pretty significantly to have. So I think standard, this card is a definite player. It'll be a big part of standard. I don't know how far beyond it goes.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's an elemental, I think its front half, the tangled Florahedron, gives it enough reason to see play in standard anyways, right? Like 2 mana Llanowar Elves have seen play pretty regularly.
Yeah.
I think actually this is a good example of kind of like what you don't want these cards to do. What you want them to do is be good late game or lands you play early game. When they're both early game cards, it's not really worth it anymore because you rarely want to just play a land tapped late game. What you want to do is play a land tapped turn 1, turn 2, so that then late game, if you draw this, you can draw cards off of it or do some big splashy effect. So I think this has, kind of the opposite problem. Like I'm almost more willing to say that Zoth Consumption has a chance of seeing real play somewhere than Tangled Florahedron.
Because it's a land that does 4 damage. I mean, that's like, if they can't gain life, like that can close the game out. I think the interesting thing to point out, though, of what we're talking about here is that we haven't mentioned the word limited a single time. And where these cards are the most exciting in a lot of ways, these ones at the level we're talking about, these are all sweet and limited. Like Umara Wizard is great. Like Umara Wizard and limited is like, oh yeah, I'll play a tapped land that you're telling me when I top deck this when I'm like totally screwed on just like mana flooded. Is a 4/3 that's going to be able to start beating in the air as an air elemental, basically. Like most of these cards for limited are going to be totally legit. Oh yeah, you won't play probably more than like 4 or 5 in a deck, but I could easily see if you could get 4 or 5 playing as many as 4 or 5 up to like 20 lands.
If Zendikar is as aggressive as original Zendikar, then yes. If it's not, you're able to stabilize, I think you play as many as you can. Like I think it's almost like the old conspiracy. Like when Conspiracy, like the first time I played Conspiracy with Gavin, he stomped everyone. And the way he did is he just grabbed every single conspiracy no matter what. He didn't care if there was a conspiracy in the pack, he picked it. And basically at the end of it, he was like, no, these cards all read draw a card at the beginning of your turn. It's the same reason Companion was problematic, right? And these are similar effects where every land, like late game, you now have like guarantees that you won't get mana flooded, which are these cards. The next card is Spikefield Hazard. 1 red, Spikefield Hazard deals 1 damage to any target. If a permanent deals damage this way, would die this turn, exile it instead. Flip side is a red mana. So we were talking, I think, with it was Braden from the CDH cast, and he actually was pretty excited by this, I think, for CDH or just like competitive formats. I think like this has gut shotty. It's like you get to play a gut shot, but it's a land if you need it.
It's in the spot of a land.
Like instead of it being free, it's a land. I agree.
This one jumps out at me for sure. It's because it's an instant as well, which makes it even like that much more exciting. Yeah, and in terms of burn, this is definitely this is the card that jumps out at me right the most for burn so far.
I guess we mentioned with the issue with Tangled Florahedron and maybe the possibilities of Zoth Consumption. This is the third option, right? Where it's like versatility. This is almost like the charm effect where like this is a card that like has a charm on one side of like this is a blowout if this is good. If there's a moment where I get to kill an X1 because I have this in my deck, then this is the best card in my deck because I just spent 1 mana to kill their 2-drop or 3-drop. It's dead. I just exiled it, so they can't even get it back from their graveyard. But if it's bad, if it's not good in that matchup, you just play it as a land. Like you just play them out.
Let me ask you this. How do these cards read in your graveyard? Is it a land or a creature?
It's an instant. Now that is actually something that we haven't gone over is weirdness with rules. So like for instance, these are cards that like in a Living End deck, like all count as spells, but you can play them as lands or cast the spell side. Or that's like not the best example because they're still just 3-drops or more is what's available. But the fact that you can, there's like cards that like reveal a card, it's converted mana cost, do a thing with that converted mana cost, right? And I'm blanking on cards that effect. Hopefully Marshall can think of some and put them on. I know there's
Dark Confidant or something. I mean, like,
well, Dark Confidant's the opposite side of that. I'm thinking more something
you're talking like Sin Prodder, like Duskmantle Seer, cards like that.
Or a good example, yes, or even like an example would be the Red Gearhulk, right? Where like. So the Red Gearhulk, when it enters play, your opponent gets to choose draw or they take damage, and you either draw 3 cards or the 3 cards you would have drawn go to your graveyard, and then they take damage equal to their total CMC. So if you're playing a deck with that Red Gearhulk and you have a ton of these cards in here, not this one because it's a 1-drop, but you're playing with like the white one, right? That's like 8 mana. Like, you're just playing it as a land, but because you're having an effect that does damage, if they decide to take damage, they're taking, 16 to the face if you reveal 2 of them. So, like, there's weird, like, converted mana cost matter effects. There's not a lot of them in Magic, but there's some, and some of them are weirdly powerful, and these can take advantage of those.
So like Spikefield Hazard, for instance, cannot be returned to my hand with life from the loam. Like, none of these cards can. They're all crazy.
But,
Gotcha.
But it's, how Kess works with adventures?
Yes.
So for instance, the blue, green, black legend that lets you return a permanent of every card type from your graveyard to play.
Yeah.
So he or they can cast the land side of these because stuff like that only checks what it is once it's on the stack.
Got it.
Or when a land is entering play, right? When it's like when it's transferring zones is when these cards check effects. So Kess can cast the instant side of adventures because it only cares that you're casting an adventure or you're casting an instant sorcery as it hits the stack. So same deal here. You can play lands from your graveyard that way. I think also things like Crucible Worlds. I think you can play lands from your yard. These as lands.
Wait, I'm so confused as to how that works. Why would it?
Crucible doesn't care that you're playing a land until you're playing it. Like it's not checking ahead of time as you're playing a land to make sure that card is a land. So I believe, and obviously we're going to get corrected if I'm wrong, but like basically what people have said. So another example is Rada, who lets you play Oracle of Moldiah. You can play lands from the top of your deck. You can play these from the top of your deck with an Oracle of Moldiah.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. Well, I like this one. I like Spikefield Hazard a lot, so I'm sure we'll talk some more about the rules interactions as we go. The next card we have here is Songmad Treachery, which is red 3. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. So it's an act of treason. It's a threaten effect. Also with a tapped red source on the other side. For limited, bonkers, right? Because it's a tapped land that's going to have that effect that often wins limited games anyway. Do you play this in standard? Do you play this beyond standard? I mean...
So in Commander, I have a treachery deck based around Kess called Kess Crimes. There's a deck list somewhere on the internet. I'm snap putting this in that deck, right? Because it's looking for treachery effects in general that are better than just treachery. Right. I think this is playable in a lot of other places. This is an effect that like can be back, like can just win you the game, right? Like
100%.
without even thinking about it. But like is never good enough to play in your main deck. Never good enough to play in your like even your sideboard. But as the fact that this is just a tap land, like this is a really powerful effect to have for free in your deck, or like without taking a deck slot. And I think this is one of the, and we're going to see other ones. I think this is an interesting one to keep an eye on. There's a reason this is 5 mana. I want to say, right? Like normally a treachery, like Act of Treason is 3 mana. That is in like every set ever printed. And then like Act of Treachery that gives it +2/+0, 4 mana. An Act of Treachery that lets you scry 2 or whatever. That's all 4 mana. So like the fact that this is 5 mana kind of should dictate how good it is. Next card is Skyclave Cleric. This is a 1/3 for 2. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life.
It's fine. This is a good limited card. I think there's probably more constructed application because it costs 2 and I think blocks well. Also, it's part of the whole cleric thing, so it's part of your party. This card might see play, to be honest with you. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if this card sees play in like standard blue-white control kind of a thing, just because it blocks, it gains you life, and it's a land. But I think beyond, like it reads a little bit like the story of what's the 2 mana gets you a land, gains 2 life, makes a wall. Birth of Meletis.
Yeah.
It reads a little bit like Birth of Meletis. It feels a little like that card.
Yeah, I think they're really comparable. I think something else about this card is the fact that it's a cleric in regards to party decks, but it's kind of a free cleric. Is pretty. It's a free cleric that you're almost never too sad to cast. Like 2 life, 1/3 for 2 is like pretty serviceable. Because of its stabilizing effect, the fact that it can now be a blocker. Like in some ways, it's 2 mana, gain 6 life a lot of the times because you'll block like a 4 attacking thing. So I think it's on the top end of these being playable.
I think this next one is really playable. I think this next one is one of the better ones. So this next one is an instant Salundi Vision. Blue 2. Sorry, I'm just going to jump in because I have to look at either the cards or I have to look at you, so I actually can't see how your body is language. So I have to just do it like this one. So
got it. Cool. I'm shaking my head like you do you.
Yeah,
bro.
Yeah. I thought you were going to call me Boo, but you didn't. So blue and 2 instant Salundi's Vision. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. It's an uncommon tapped blue source. So where this card is so good is the fact that it reads instant. If this was a sorcery, it would still be good. You would still be able to use it. But the fact that in any kind of like draw go deck, this is your turn 1 land if you need it to be. And those decks don't care about playing a tap land on turn 1 almost ever. In Modern, they want to be able to use the land to like draw a card, but often many formats don't care about playing a tap land on turn 1, right? So like, look at Celestial Colonnade. So you play this card, or you don't, and you top it. Say what?
No, I was going to say, honestly, like playing this tapped on turn 1 in Modern forces you not to spend your Serum Visions early, which makes you a better player because you get to use it when you have more information. It's going to be a better card. Not the worst.
Yeah.
Like,
so then like you're just sitting there building your lands up. First you're holding open Remand, right? Then you're holding open like Vendilion Click or Nimble Obstructionist or whatever 3-drop borrower that you want to flash in. Then you're holding up Cryptic Command. And the whole time, at any point in time, if you want to, you just have this extra card that you basically drew an island and you're going to flash it in for 3. On turn 5, you can play this and hold open Counterspell to dig 6. Digging 6 to get like a Cryptic Command for the next turn, or to get that path to exile you need, or to find your Supreme Verdict. Like this card is great. This is a card that I almost assuredly will be playing in like many formats. Like it'll be in Highlander Gauntlet, it'll be in Arena Gauntlet, it'll be in Historic, it'll be in probably Modern. I don't play this control deck in Modern very often, but I wouldn't be surprised if Blue White Control in Modern played this. Would not surprise me.
Yeah, I like this card a lot. Next card, Shajiri Shelter. 1 and a white, instant. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn.
Instant. It's an instant. So
this is an effect
that makes it good.
Yeah. This is an effect that sees play all the time. Normally it's 1 mana, but the fact that this can be a land, I'm relatively off it. But this is the type of effect that other people play and love, and I've never played and will continue not to play. But other people will like it. Moving to the next card, Palaka.
Sweet and limited. Yep.
Yeah. Palaka Predation. 2 and a black. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a card from it with converted mana cost 3 or greater. That player discards that card. I actually don't like this card. I think it has the same problem as Tangled Feldahorn, where it's like they're both effects that you want early, right? The earlier you cast this, the better. Except that the front end of this card is unplayable. I would never play a 3 mana Reverse Inquisition across life.
Once again, where this card is good specifically is limited, because you're going to get their 6-drop or their 7-drop. They're going to try to win the game with out of their hand before they cast it.
I mean, even
if you draw too many lands, this is an okay card. This is an okay reason to keep your opening hand, because it just means that if you have 1 too many lands on your opener, you're going to get their best thing out of their hand before they cast it. That's what this card is to me.
I think by being a land, this makes this card playable in limited, where previously I wouldn't even touch it. Right? Like this is a card I wouldn't touch in limited before, and now it's like a card that I would be fine with being my 23rd card, and even then be unhappy about it. Malakar Rebirth, 1 black.
Card is sick.
Instant. Choose target creature. You lose 2 life until end of turn. That creature gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield under its owner's control. And then the reverse side is a tapped black.
Dude, this card's good.
Sure.
This card's sweet, because this card it's basically Undying Evil, right? But instead of giving a +1/+1 counter, it's a land. And think about how this card functions in like Mardu, Pyromancer type of decks, or any kind of those Rakdos decks that work in Modern or in a Historic, obviously. Any of those decks that are just playing on like getting value out of casting 1 mana things, this is an instant speed. So like you're sitting there with all of your lightning bolts and all your cool things open, and they're like, okay, go to kill your pyromancer. And you're like, this extra land from my opening hand, I'll just cast it, get a 1/1, save my pyromancer. It comes back, countered your spell, and it cost me a land.
Yeah,
I don't think it's insanely good, but the fact that it costs 1 as an instant is the same thing I'm talking about with the gut shot. I think this card's super legit.
I do think this is worse than the gut shot, just because like the value of drawing it late is a lot worse. I think it's a weird one to me because it's a card. The tension of playing this and not playing this on this card more than any of the ones we've talked about before is much higher, right? Because this card is marginal. But when it's good, it's great. It's countering a removal spell and it's saving your creature and maybe you get an extra ETB. But for the most part, your goal, like if you have, for instance, 3 lands in play and you don't draw a land and this is in your hand, it's going to be hard for me to not just play this as a land if I need to. So I think that's where its marginability goes up to me. But I see what you're saying that like it's so versatile for 1 mana. Obviously, is something that's really cool. I think this, like the white protection spell, is another effect that I'm like,
your answer is basically who play. Your answer is basically who plays Undying Evil, and it's a good answer. So Makindi Stampede is our next one. This is an interesting one on the same level of the threat, right? Because it's white 3 sorcery. Creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. On the flip side is a tapped white source. So in limited, this card's bonkers. I think in limited, this might be a first pick in limited, to be honest with you.
Maybe
just because I can see situations where you're like, this, it's not only is it going to be a card that when I play it is either going to win me the game or create a horribly unfavorable situation for my opponent that they have to block and lose their whole board, but it's also just a land slot to do it. And like you're getting, basically scaled down white overrun for a land spot. So I think it's really good. I don't know if there's any deck I can think of in a competitive format. There might be a white weenie deck in standard or something like that wants to take advantage, but none of the white decks, none of the white creature decks, I think in modern would do anything with this.
Yeah. Like something like a Soul Sisters, though, I guess is something I would think about. Because like this is a card that 90% of times they're playing as a tapped land, right? Like the point of this is that. But some matchups, they're going to have like 5 Soul Sisters in play. Their opponent has like 2 blockers. They've been able to like do some damage early, but then their opponent was able to stabilize because all their creatures are small and they haven't drawn their Johnny Primate, so those were answered. And you're just like, oh, right, this land gives me overrun and I win. So like that's I think like the fact that it does read I win on one side in moments that when you draw it late is good, to me is what makes this more playable to me than cards that are only good early, I guess. Yeah,
I think it's fine. I think those decks you're talking about, like a Soul Sisters type of deck, even if you're talking about the version in Historic, like they so badly want to be hitting their 1-drop on turn 1 and their 2-drop on turn 2. They play like Castle Ardenvale. I think it's the white one that makes 1/1s. Mm-hmm. And they do it like reluctantly, but they can play it untapped if they have the plane situation. I think this card is pretty bad if you have like this and a planes and you have like a 1-drop and a 2-drop. Like your hand is real awkward with this in your opening hand. So I think I think it's right on the edge. I don't think it gets played. Next up, we have Colony Ambush. It's a green 2 target creature you control fights target creature you don't control, and it's an instant and it comes into play as a tapped green source. So they're really going ham these last few years on green fight effects. It's become like, like that's like green's thing now. There's just tons of them. And I think like probably those green decks don't care that much about having a tapped green source. Often they're playing beefy things. So I think it's a pretty high upside.
I think my issue here is that card's just medium, right? Like I guess comparing it to the last card, if I get it, I win, right? If I and so having a free win condition at right moments, like basically both of these cards have the same good moment, right? I have creatures in play. I have this card. This is good. Makindi Stampede wins me the game. This card maybe kills a creature. And I lose a creature. So I'm down 2 cards for their 1 card. So I 2 for 1 myself, unless my creature is bigger than their creature. And if my creature is bigger than their creature, why did it? Like it needs so many things to go right for you to be medium, versus Makindi Stampede, which we're already saying is kind of borderline, needs like need you to just do the thing you're going to do, and it's going to be good. And you just like it's only bad if they wipe your board. Like it's bad against.
I agree. In the right moment, Makini Stampede wins you the game. In the right moment, Colony Ambush is like a good trick, like probably unlimited. Maybe, that's probably its best ability. So next up, our next instant is another 3-drop. It's red 2, Kazul's Fury. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature. Sacrifice creature deals damage equal to sacrifice creature's power to any target. So it's Fling at instant speed, which I think Fling is instant speed. I'm pretty sure
it's Thud. That's the sorcery speed version of Fling at 1 mana.
Yeah, so it's just 3 mana Fling that comes into play tapped. I think it's interesting actually. The decks that want to take advantage of Fling, like the combo decks that want to take advantage, like in Modern, like the Soul Gorger type of decks, where you're trying to deal like 8 or 10 with like 2 cards. Those decks getting extra Flings in the land slot, it's pretty great because if you think about from the concept. The only decks that play Fling are, like, generally speaking, limited decks in certain formats, or they're combo decks that want as many copies of their cards, right? So those decks probably are playing Fling, and they're maybe playing Thud, or they're maybe playing, like, other similar effects that are pretty marginal cards. So I think being able to play, say, like, 2 of these in your Fling deck, even 4 possibly, and not having to sacrifice anything other than a land spot to have redundancy makes the card interesting. Mm-hmm. Like it's a Brewer's card. I don't think it's a power card, but there's something cool to it.
I think standard historic, definitely a card to consider. I think in Commander, if you're trying to do Fling things, this is the best Fling ever printed for those formats, right? Because it's like Fling. The problem with Fling is when it's bad, it's you don't have a creature in play, you don't have the combo piece, it's just a card that's not doing anything in your hand. This was always just a land, which is like great. I have a deep love for this card purely because it's a Kazul card. And he's the star of this card, and they brought him back at least in this level. For those who don't know, Kazul is a legend from Zendikar. I think it's one of the first cards I ever owned as an adult, like easily within my first 500 cards I've ever owned. I definitely, one of my first standard decks I ever built had Kazul in it as a red-white prison deck. Do you know what the Kazul is? Do you remember this card?
Not really.
It's like 5 mana. Maybe? No. 5 mana Minotaur. I think not a Minotaur. 5 mana Ogre. I forget. It's right here. Marshall's luckily showing it. But basically, whenever someone attacks you, you make a 3/3 token for every creature attacking you, unless they pay 3.
So just a flavorful card that really connects with you because of when you had it.
Well, if you have it in play, it's really good. People attack and you make a bunch of Ogre tokens and they never pay the mana. Jwari's Disruption, 1 and a blue, instant, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1.
Yeah, this card is so sweet. This card is top of the list in terms of the cards that I'm hyped on. So we had a whole conversation in the MMCast text thread with Michael and Marshall and the 2 of us. And the conversation becomes is it, Force Spike versus Censor versus Spell Pierce versus this card? I think Pierce actually relates to a different card that was spoiled. But the whole conversation about this is very interesting because it's a guaranteed tapped blue source. So you do not get the untapped blue that effectively, you need to cast your 1-drop, to cast your other counterspell. But if you have 2 of them in your opening hand, you have an island, you're able to play this tap, play the island, hold this open the next turn, right? I don't find Censor to be that good, but I know Censor is at least decent. Censor gets you a card, this gets you a land, so they're very comparable in that sense. I feel like probably I take this card over Censor, and the reason is because I always want to play less lands in my low to the ground blue decks. Always. And you can do that with Censor, but if you don't draw a land in your opening hand because you're playing 20 lands or 19 or something like that, and you have a Censor, you have to mulligan the hand. But if I draw this card, right, I can keep the hand because even if it's my only land necessarily and everything in my deck costs 1 or 2. So I think I prefer this. It's right next to Censor, though. What do you think?
I think I like Censor more. It's kind of what I've been on this whole time, where it's both sides of these cards are good at the same time, which to me brings where it's not as good. I want this turn 1. I want this turns 2 through 4. I don't really want a tapped land turn 7 or turn 6. Now, the small difference is that
Censor because it just cycles.
But I want Censor. If I top deck this card on turn 5, how happy am I? And I'm pretty sad on both ends. Now, that's not totally true, right? You can get people on turn 4 and a turn 5 with the Jwari Disruption. They'll play 2 spells. You get the second one, so that's fine. And also, I've definitely been I have this 6-drop. It's turn 4. I need this to come in. I'll play this tapped on turn 4, so that turn 5 I play the untapped land, and then I can play my 5-drop, right? You can time your tapped lands correctly for it to be fine. the front half of the card is powerful. I think though that like in the long run, I liked Censor so much and I never played it, and I'm still not really playing it anywhere. And I like that card more than this card. Standard's a different conversation.
Let me just throw a thought at you really quickly, and then we'll move on from this, because if you keep an opening hand, let's pretend you're playing mono blue in historic, or let's say you're playing like a heavily low to the ground blue deck in modern, right? I don't really know what modern deck is mono blue or would be doing that, but blue red spells or something like that. And let's say Censor's in your opening hand and you have one blue source, right? An untapped blue source. It's a one lander. And you're like, okay, I'm on player draw. You're like, I can keep this because I love the hand, but I have one land in it. So you cycle the Censor, maybe you don't hit your land drop, then you're really, you're bummed.
Sure. Yeah.
Flip that to the one land situation where your second land is this card. So now you're like, well, I have a one lander. I don't have my Censor to draw me my extra card, but I actually have two lands. Even, and like, to me, that's like so many more games are lost by making that gamble on a one land hand than being forced to keep a two lander that's not ideal, that also has a counterspell in it, that I think like probably more of the time you will play more successful games of Magic in the formats that would play a card like a Censor or a Disruption. So like top half, last 5 years. I think you'll get more games of Magic that you don't just lose to yourself when you're playing with this card versus Censor, is my guess. Because I have a tendency to keep those one landers off of cyclers.
So I guess there's two things. One, I don't think you should keep one blue source Censor. And like very specific, your deck has to have multiple other ones. I mean, like you shouldn't do that, right? I'm not saying people don't do that. I've done that, but like especially in the world with the London Mulligan, where like your mulligan, like that's like turn your mulligan down to 5 at that point. Maybe is when I start thinking of keeping that hand. On the flip side, pun intended, with this one, yes, you're right. This is a better card in that situation, but you have this card, 1 blue mana, and a 3-drop. So you have this, a 1 blue source. Actually, even 2 blue. You have 2 blue sources, this, and a 3-drop. Do you play this on turn 1? Tapped.
No, definitely not.
You have two
blue sources and a 3-drop?
No, sorry. You have this and this and 1 blue source. Sorry, not 3. You have this and 1 blue source and a 3-drop. Do you play this
tapped on turn 1?
Okay, every time. Okay.
Because that's the value, and it's one of your lands. So like, I think this card's better, barely, but I think it is better.
Okay, next card.
Next up, Black Bloom Rogue, which is black 2 creature human rogue. It's a 2/3 menace. Human rogue. Black Bloom Rogue gets +3/+0 as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So potentially you're playing a 5/3 for 3 mana that has menace if they have 8 or more cards in their yard, and it's on the flip side as a tapped black source. So this card's interesting because the reality of it is a 5/3 menace creature, even if you are playing a format like, I guess Modern has Lightning Bolt, but like if you're playing any format, a 5/3 menace creature in a lot of cases is a win condition enough to win the game. If you have other things to support it, 5 power is a lot of power. It's a land. In theory, you're playing this alongside cards that are going to guarantee there's 8 cards in your graveyard all the time. I don't know this is like a constructed staple by any means, but I definitely think this card is something. This card's pushed a little bit. I think +2/+0 is what I would have expected.
So 2 things. One, obviously the creature type is the creature type, and then a bunch of cards printed around that creature type are the 2 most relevant things, right? There is a mill your opponent and get bonuses for it theme within the Rogue tribe this year, since M21. So like there's the 1-drop that it has Death Touch or it has Death Touch and it gets +2/+0. Right? If they have 8 cards in the graveyard or something. So like that's a theme it's on theme, right? This card is working with your theme. Worst case scenario, you can play it as a land always, right? So it's a creature land in many ways, with a tribe that's relevant based on ability that's relevant to that tribe. So all of that in a pile, put it in every Rogue's deck, go for it. Yeah, I think that's and like at that point the conversation comes into like how marginal do you want your lands to come into play tapped, etc. So I think from that perspective, it's just it's good.
Next up, we have Balagad Recovery. Green 2 sorcery. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. It comes into play as a tapped green source. I think regrowth effects are really hard to gauge. I think the difference between regrowth and like treasured find, or treasured find and Eternal Witness, for instance. It's always like really nebulous and hard to figure out which ones are going to be good. I don't think this card is good, but it's probably playable. There's probably a deck that's willing to play this card.
I think the fact that it doesn't exile itself when you cast it is like super relevant.
Okay, yeah.
So like a lot of regrowth effects have recently been stuff that has an exile rider on it. It's partially because regrowth was broken back in the day. Like it is a card that has been banned. Yeah. So the fact that you can like rebuy it and you can play it and it's something else and you can kind of do shenanigans with that. I think the fact that it interacts with lands in the way it does is also makes it just playable in every commander format. Every lands commander deck, just because like the fact that Oracle of Maldaya can play this card off the top of your deck as a land, and then you can crop rotation this into your graveyard, or crop rotation something else into your graveyard, and then use this to get it back. Like it just like is such a workhorse card that does so much, and like because it has the land tribal side, like it takes advantage of those things. I think this card is actually really powerful. From a versatility perspective, and then added the fact that there's actually maybe just broken things I'm not thinking about that you can do with it, right? Like you can just like rebuy time twisters and extra turn effects and whatever.
We haven't mentioned yet one of the things that I think is the most interesting about the more powerful land effects or the more powerful spell effects that are on these lands. Like, what about when you play this card on turn 1, and then like in some format you play a bounce land, you get this card back. So now you've returned a spell to your hand that got to function early as a land for you. That's pretty good, right? There's anything that's going to be able to return land, like return a land to your hand, so then you can get the other side of it once you need it. I think there's definitely going to be some interplay with these cards, and something like this that's a relevant card is exactly the kind of card you'd expect that for. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of the Azusa Primeval Titan type of deck. I don't know if it's that one in particular that does take advantage of a card like this as one of their lands.
Imagine playing this in Amulet Titan as a one of, right? You like play it as a land early. If you draw it late, it's amazing. You can get a pact back. Peeking. You can get a pact back. You can get a Primeval Titan they've killed. You can get a Teleria West you cycled. You can get like any of the things you would want, right? Like, so it's great buying stuff back. But also you can play it as a land, and then the bounce land interaction is so strong there that like I think this card's like, this card specifically is on probably, if I were to rate all of these, closer to the top for me so far of like most likely just to see play.
Well, yeah, because like you go like turn 1, this card tapped, turn 2, tap it for green, bounce it back to your hand, play like Abriel Grazer, put a different land into play. Like there's plenty of uses for the 1 green.
Valakut Awakening. 2 and a red, instant. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1. This card's insane. I think this is on the top end of these cards in general. It's an instant. So it's an instant red card that lets you sculpt your hand while also creating a bunch of draw card triggers, while also letting the stack the bottom of your deck, which can be relevant, while also just being able to always just be a land. And this card is always good late game and is fine to play on turn 1.
I mean, I think it's not always good late game, because what if you're in top deck mode? Then this card doesn't do anything.
What cycle?
It's just a land.
What cycles?
That's true. Actually, that's true, because it's +1.
It's an instant speed cycler. So worst case scenario, you cast this and you draw. If this is the only card, you draw this, you have no cards in hand, it's the last card you have, it's 3 mana draw card. Instant speed.
Yeah, that's fair, actually. This card is really good. You're right. I didn't even think about that. Because of the +1 effect, no matter what, you draw this thing, and if it's the only, you just cycle it away. Yeah. And it's also a land early. Yeah, card's pretty bonkers.
Yeah. In red, right? Like that's also like not a color that normally gets something like that. I think it's really good. All right. Do you want to do the lands now, or do you want to do the land? Let's do the lands now. I think it's time.
Okay. So we have a cycle. We have a cycle of these lands. They enter the battlefield as one or the other. So you have blue-red, you have red-white, you have red-green, you have black-green, and you have there's more of them? White-black? There's blue-black. There's 6.
The 4 that they don't have green-black, they don't have blue-green, they don't have red-black, and they don't have blue-white. And it's been confirmed that all 4 of those are in Keldheim. So the remaining 4 to yesterday, Monday, Maro's the State of Design article kind of went over that the theme of the year is these type of, you get to choose which side comes into play flip cards, and Keldheim has the next 4 lands is an example of that. So he was able to confirm that. Versus everyone.
This So this cycle is interesting. It's I think one of the particularly interesting things about it is that it feels like design space that just I can't believe hasn't been explored yet. They're untapped, which is good, right? Like it's you have to make your decision in terms of the untapped nature. So they feel not the same, but they have sort of a similar effect to, let's say, like Prismatic Vista. You know, that could get you 5 colors, obviously, but it's still that idea that you have to sort of make the decision of what this is going to be the turn you go for it. Doesn't turn into a basic, obviously, but interesting. I think they're interesting lands. I think the fact that they're untapped makes them totally playable. I don't think they're bonkers, but they're pretty good.
I think any of them that are enemy colors are just like auto includes in Commander now forever, because enemy color land combos don't have enough options. But so that has deck building restrictions, right? It does lean you farther away from 3-color decks. It leans you closer to 2-color decks, where so that way you don't have you won't get as punished. It makes playing if you're not leaning into a specific color, it makes playing 2-pip cards or more much harder. So like something that's like black is a lot harder to cast with these cards because you might have to choose to pick the white side of the black-white one, right? You won't always put the black side in. But they come into play untapped with no restrictions. You always get an untapped land out on one of these, which I think is extremely relevant, and why like fast lands are comparable, right? They have a different drawback than fast lands. Like they don't ever come into play tapped, but mid game they're the worst. Like turn 4, they're bad.
Let me throw this at you. Because so I agree with everything you just said, but I think where these lands compare really favorably to other lands that we have, that we haven't had. Compare favorably to lands we have had, is that so fast lands, if you packed out a 3-color deck with 12 of them, as people did sometimes, you definitely have that case of the feel bads where you have a bad run and just lands 4 through 6 are all coming in tapped. Mm-hmm. It really hampers the middle of the game. With like shock lands, like if you play 12 shock lands, you're trying to play 3 colors, you take a lot of damage. It's rough. You definitely hurt yourself a lot doing that, especially if there's fetch lands involved. If you play pain lands, same kind of thing. If you draw a bunch of pain lands, right? Or let's say if you're playing like the Modern Horizons ones, you definitely take a lot of damage. Temples come into play tap. Check lands, sometimes you get 2 of them, you get a little screwed. Where these are so interesting is that if I want to play a 3-color deck and I play 12 of these in my deck, there's no drawback at all. Like they're really good. They're just going to get me where I want to get probably. I probably have to be a little careful with like what color spells I'm playing in my deck and how aggressively I'm going with double and triple casting costs. But otherwise, I don't care how many of these I draw. They're all untapped dual lands.
Yeah.
They're all getting me what I need the turn I draw them, which I think makes them very strong. And I think almost deceptively weak, but I think they're very good, actually.
I think it's a really good point. Like the ability to draw multiples of these and be fine makes them like top tier mana fixing ever printed.
I think so. Yeah.
And maybe in the top, I think honestly they're Horizon lands power level. That's where I have them in my head, where Horizon's cost is a lot higher, but their upside is a lot higher, right? But these have all the upside that you just described. And the cost is like just having to make a choice. And sometimes you're going to want black on turn 2 and green on turn 3. And these lands aren't going to work out for you. And that's
I think like singleton formats. They're good, but they're good, but they're not like insane. They're just good lands. But I definitely think in the format, like in the standard format, when you have 6 of these, I think it's going to be, and eventually 10. I think you're going to see really cool like 4 and 5 color decks.
And I think in singleton formats, just stop playing fast lands. These are better. You should already stop playing. I had a whole conversation about that where like the signet lands or fast lands, what's better, and the kind of conversations, they're both bad. But these are just like better than those. I think these will see play in tons of commander decks. I think but I agree with you that it's their greatest strength is that you can play a deck that's all of them. I can play a 30. Is there enough? 6 times 3?
There's 24, man. You could right now you could play a 5-color deck with 24 of these in your deck, and like every land you draw is effectively a dual land. I think is a very there's probably going to be a 5-color deck in standard that's doing exactly that. So pretty cool. Let's continue moving through here. Yep. Our next card is Ondu Inversion, white 6, sorcery, destroy all non-land permanents. It's a tapped white source. It's a rare. I think probably this is a one of in a standard control deck. It probably could be a one of in like a modern deck. The fact that it's
This is
it gets rid of planeswalkers.
It's such a powerful effect. I can see this just being a one. Like, there's a world where this is a one of in every deck that every control deck ever printed that's playing white, right? Like, you don't lose anything in those decks. Those decks have much less of a problem because you like basically turns 3 through 6 is just playing tapped lands, and just keeping counter magic up. So I can see decks just free rolling this card as a one of, because like having this late game is just so powerful, and having that as a benefit. I guess
maybe you play more than one of these, to be honest. Now that the more that I think about it, I mean, like Ugin's so good, and like obviously this is not as powerful as Ugin, but like it cost 8, right? And when you get to 8 and you cast Ugin, you probably win. Like if you're playing this in the land slot in your deck and you just have a planar cleansing, like I wouldn't be surprised if control decks play 2 or 3 of these, to be honest. I mean, I guess it just depends on which other tap lands you want to play, but yeah, it is really good in a land slot.
Now that we're in the rare area, it's also like, if this is good enough to see play in Modern, and maybe one other one is good enough to see play in Modern, do I play, like, how much, like, Deprive just increases its power level exponentially.
Yeah, right? Deprive becomes so good.
Do I just play a blue-white bounce land, just like one of them, as just an option? Where it's just like,
probably
right, like getting the ability to draw these back to your hand later, and cards that let you do that increase in power level. Like another one is Multani, the 6 mana. It's power and toughness equal how many lands you control, but if it's in your graveyard, you can pay 1 and a green to return it to your hand and return 2 lands to your hand. Like that card with these cards in historic or whatever is also kind of insane. So I think like returning stuff to your hand effects have a lot more value.
What's the card from Mercadian Masks? Trade Routes? Is it 1 blue, 1 colorless? For a colorless, you can return a land you control to your opponent's hand. Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine just playing a deck with like all of these and just that. Like, I'll just pick and choose which of my lands I want to turn into spells.
Right. Kazandu Mammoth, 1 green, landfall, 1 green, 3/3 elephant. Backside is a tapped forest. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Kazandu Mammoth gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So this is a 3 mana 5/5 or a 3 mana 7/7 in Modern with fetch lands. That's a forest tapped land all the time. I think this card's really
for those
good.
on audio. It's not a forest. It's just a tapped green source. Just to clarify.
Sure. Yeah.
None of them are. Yeah, just making sure. I agree. I think especially considering like in Modern, if you're playing the like 12 fetch land green deck that's got mana creatures in it, and you go like turn 1 mana creature, turn 2 mammoth. And then you're like, yeah, turn 3, I'll play this fetch land and attack you for 7. Right. That seems good. That seems real good. It feels like the fact that you have this card, they printed another Step Links, and we have like, there was another Step Links in the set, right? They gave us Step Links.
They have a red Step Links. It's a red.
So now you're playing Naya
cards. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, now you're playing like Naya Birds of Paradise with like 4 of these and 4 each of those other ones, and probably some other effect that just lets you go completely ham. Like, seems pretty good. I don't think Mammoth is insane because it doesn't have Trampler or anything like that, but I think it's playable. I think it's a good card.
Like, this is a creature I have no problem having in play in the late game.
I was just going to say the landfall creatures have an especially cool presence with these, because not only obviously is he just a good creature who can be a land in your deck, but he's a land that triggers the other landfall creatures in your deck.
Yes.
So if you draw him as a land later, he makes all of your creatures bigger.
Oh yeah, and in historic, especially like a green-red landfall deck that's aggressive.
Yeah,
like playing this is sweet, and I think this is great in not Modern. Hagra Mauling, 2 black. Instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast if your opponent controls no basic lands. Destroy target creature. This card's also really good.
This card's great. This card's probably one of the better cards in the set. I guess it depends on format a little bit. Like Standard, probably we're not going to be. Granted, we just talked about how many of these non-basics people in Standard are going to be playing, but I mean, if you have black to store target creature that's also a land, I mean, that seems like great value. Like in the way that Murderous Rider was like just so ubiquitous and has been.
It's 1 black. It can never be black. It'll always be. It's either 2 black or 1 black.
Oh! I thought it cost 1 less for. Got it. Okay, yeah, it's still good. It's still good.
Like, people are playing 4 mana destroy target creature. Now normally it's exile target planeswalker creature, right? That's like the normal thing for 4 mana you want. This is only a creature, but it's also a land. It does a lot. It's one of those cards like, I would love to top deck this. No problem. Almost every matchup I've ever played, like getting this is fine as a top deck, and then getting this on turn 1 to 2, no problem playing it tapped. And so I think that's the sign of one of these cards being playable. Yeah. Next card is Glasspool Mimic, 2 and a blue, Shapeshifter Rogue. You may have Glasspool Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a Shapeshifter Rogue in addition to its other types. So it keeps its rogue status that has to do with the party mechanic. You get another rogue. So it is rogue tribal, that is a land, and it doubles up your best rogue. So you're going to have to tell me if that's rogue playable. But I think it's fine.
It's fine.
I think it's
fine. Yeah, and I don't think it costs 3 as a creature, which like makes it in like any of the rogue builds like just good enough. If you play this on turn 3 and it's like an Una's Blackguard, for instance, which is like one of the in historically it's one of the only modern it's only one of the only rogue tribal cards that's like really sweet. Mm-hmm. It's just not that good. It comes into play as a rogue and it's like a 2/2 Una's Blackguard. Mm-hmm. It's okay. I just think the fact that it's a land, I guess, is interesting, but like
it doesn't have to copy a rogue, but.
Yeah, I just mean it's like a blue-black. It's probably a blue-black deck, right? Is what you're probably doing, because if you're trying to take advantage of the rogue synergy, and like those decks they have lots of 1-drops. They don't want to play this tapped pretty much ever. Like, I think almost don't want tapped lands. Period.
I think this card's better in decks that are more on the party train. Right, like if you're trying to take advantage of the party mechanic, this is always your rogue. Like you get this as a rogue, but then you get more powerful effects from the other creatures, maybe. But yeah, I've never loved clones that only copy things in play under your control. I know other people have been Johnny about them and broke them, but I'm always reticent to play those because, as again, if I top deck this and I'm behind, I have nothing in play, and this is the only card I have available, this card's terrible. It doesn't do anything. So I'm off it. And so that's at the end of the rare. So the rare cycle is the Mimic, the removal spell in black, the board wipe in white, the Mammoth in green, and the card draw spell in red. We are now into the last cycle that we have revealed. And I believe as far as the rares and mythics go, this is everything. I don't think we're going to get, and I think that this is everything else. We're mostly been previewed at this point. So I'm gonna go for the first one. Turn Timber Symbiosis, 4 green. So that's 7 mana, 3 green, 4 generic. Sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. If that card had converted mana cost 3 or less, it enters with 3 additional +1/+1 counters on it. Put the rest on the bottom of your library. In random order. Now, 2 things. 1, because of the way the mechanic works, the 3 counters allows like any Hydra to come into play. This is meant to kind of play in the Hydra space. So you get to play and that's why there's a Hydra in the artwork. So you get a Hydra can come into play and get the counters it needs to survive. It also is kind of meant to be like, you just spent 7 mana and all you're getting is a 2-drop. Here is a 2-drop that gets +3/+3. I think this is the worst of these 5 spells. And I think it's the worst by a pretty wide margin of the mythics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if we mentioned the flip side that. Yeah, so the mechanic on the next 4 and this one included, they're not types, so they're not like forest or island. They're all like just a green source or black source, but they state they enter the battlefield tapped unless you pay 3 life. So this can be an untapped green source on turn 1 if you pay 3 life. And so that makes all 5 of these elevated way, way, way up because like it's an untapped source of the color you need on turn 1, or it's a big splashy spell you can draw late. It's like in the space of like Summoning Trap or like See the Unwritten, that like those types of effects. It costs 7 and it's not instant. It's just okay.
I guess where I wasn't thinking of, the problem is at 7 mana, it's so expensive. And all of these are expensive, but it's like the deck I would imagine it being kind of cool on is like anything with playing Emrakul that's playing like trying to cheat Emrakul and play, because you can just play this as a land that comes to play untapped at your land, and then 1 out of 1,000 games you get to cheat Emrakul out of play because you got to 7 mana, you get to cast this spell, and maybe in Pioneer and Historic and Standard that's a deck, right? Like maybe just. Especially once we get to Shadows over Innistrad, which I think is the next set. I know we have 2 sets. We have Kaladesh in the next one, but like, right now you can just cheat. You can cheat Ulamog, right? Like you can use this in a cool deck that's trying to cheat Ulamog into play. and maybe that's good enough. Maybe this alongside Luca, like a Luca deck that's playing this is like a backup plan we'll see play. That's pretty cool. So yeah, there is that.
I think also keep in mind, so something I think about this that is really powerful, and I think especially for Historic, there's a mono green Historic deck that's like one of the better decks right now you can play. And what it's basically doing is just trying to ramp out good things. Like it's trying to play a turn 2 Leaf Crab Paladin, the 5/4 for 3. And it's trying to play that, and it's trying to play like Questing Beasts and all, like just good things in green, Nissa and stuff like that. So having this card in that deck to be able to get you the exact curve you want, playing 4 of this card in that deck. And then it means that like once you've accelerated, you have all of your mana creatures out and your Paradise Druids and everything, and you draw this card, and you're like, great. Well, now I just drew my 7 mana card that also was going to function as my turn 1 land, and it's going to dig for my Ulamog or my Craterhoof Behemoth or whatever. Like this, This in the Elf deck, is just a turn 1 land that just digs for Craterhoof when you need it to, because you don't at the point that you can't.
Yeah, no, I think I got lost in the second half of the ability where I was focusing on cost 3s. The fact that this is just Summoning Trap that's a land is pretty dope.
Yeah, and especially because it's in green, right? So like, and green actually just wants you to have an untapped source for an elf on turn 1. Mm-hmm. So it's that much more important that it's an untapped source. That I just think it fits the style of what those green decks want to do. So I give it a nod. Let's see what the other ones do, and we can kind of rank them afterwards.
I'll reverse my opinion. I think this is actually super playable. I'm sorry. You've changed my mind, Ben. I admit that I was wrong.
Rare.
Yeah, I think like also just like even Legacy Elves, right? Just playing one of these is like fine there, because like you also have ways to return lands, I think, right? Symbiote lets you do that. No, that's a creature. And that the other one returns forest. But basically, like just like if you draw this late game and you have Gaia's Cradle online, this gets you your dope thing, and worst case scenario gets you like Oracle of Moldiah. And then in like Elves, like the earlier the format you get, the less tribal focused you are, and the more like just trying to find a big ramp spell. So yeah, I think this is dope.
Crop rotate into a bounce land, end of turn, get your sweet spell in hand.
Right.
Like,
Yep.
Next up we have Shatterskull Smashing. Red X, sorcery. Shatterskull Smashing deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, Shatterskull Smashing deals twice X damage divided as you choose among them instead. So it's the other side. It's red, and you can pay 3 to have it come in untapped. So it's red X for like sorcery speed. I pay 5 or I pay 6 or whatever, and I deal like 3 or 4 to 2 of your creatures to your planeswalkers, which like it's not to a player. So this is a limited first pick that wins you the game. But beyond that, for the most part, probably this is meta dependent. I don't think this is
serviceable removal spell, right? Like this is people wouldn't play it, but people wouldn't play it if this was not a land. And the fact that most of the time you play this as a land tapped, then second most common use case is pay it as a land that costs you 3 life. And then you can play as a removal spell. It's also really inexpensive, right? Like this is of the 5, the one that you'll just cast more often because you draw it on turn 4, and it's just like, oh, I do like 2 damage to a creature, or I do 1 damage to 2 creatures. I kill 2 birds of paradise, and I'm just like way ahead because I cast this spell.
It's just the least powerful of them is the problem. And that's the whole idea of like, or good early, good late. Like if I draw this late, I have lots of lands in play, and you don't have good targets for me, it's just the power of X is not that good.
Sure.
It's like, if you have like a creature I need to kill, it's like, I'm going to spend 5 mana to kill your creature. So I think it's okay.
But like
this one, to me, this one feels,
it for sure is going to kill. If you spend 6 mana, it's like gonna kill whatever you want. Right, like at 8 mana, which is what all the other ones basically cost. It's straight up Doomblade.
6 to 2 things.
Yeah, to 2 things almost. Right.
Yeah. Like that's fair. Next up, we've got Seagate Restoration. Blue 4 sorcery. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand +1. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, and it's a blue source that enters tapped. You can play untapped. I think this one's pretty good. I think it's because blue often really does like to have an untapped source on turn 1, whether it's to cycle, it's to play like a Brainstorm or Serum Visions, whatever, or if it's just to make sure that on turn 2 you can hold up and counter magic. I think the only concern with this is that like the kind of deck that for 7 mana is going to get a like good value, like it's a control deck. right? And if that's where this is good, and that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty cool. It's just it doesn't fit into most blue decks. It doesn't fit into most blue decks for me as like a card I'd want to play because I don't want to have 7 mana sorcery speed, like trying to draw like 3 or draw 4 or something like that, and tapping out for that is kind of how I feel. What do you think?
I don't know if I would play the spell as a 5-drop or even a 4-drop. Maybe as a 4-drop. Like, I feel like that card exists and I wouldn't play it. So, like, the question is, like, I think this is a card, and I know people say this, and I agree with the pet peeve that, like, not every dumb, expensive card is a Commander card, because Commander is, like, a real format that has, like, things that don't work here. And so, like, just being an expensive big thing doesn't make it Commander playable. I do think because this is a land, like, a lot of blue decks will just free roll this. Especially every mono blue deck can just get this card for free, and then once in a while we'll cast this and it'll be great. And like if 1 out of 100 games you cast this, it's still really good because it costs you nothing in a format where your life total doesn't matter. Especially like Shatterskull Smashing is similar, I think, in Commander, right? Like the cost of paying 3 life to have these come into play untapped in a Commander format is so low because you have 40 life that, like, why not play these free cards to make your deck better? So I do think this is a card people will play a ton of because of that. I think that in constructed formats, this card is bad. Like almost the opposite side of the spectrum of Turn Timber Symbiosis, which I think Turn Timber Symbiosis is a very playable competitive format. And I honestly think actually Shatterskull Smashing is as well. Because like just getting a removal spell.
Get Restoration, the whole concept of drawing this card late, if you're in top deck mode where you're holding open like you're holding like a land in hand and like a counterspell and they're just attacking you and not casting anything. And you're like, I'll spend 7 to draw 2 or 3 cards. And also I'm tapped out now, so I can't do anything with this until next turn is like pretty bad.
Yeah. It's generally going to be win more. What I like it in Commander more than anything is there's a lot of good, like I forget the artifact's name, but there's a 5-mana artifact creature is power and toughness equal to your hand size and does damage every time you draw a card to every opponent. Like this card's nuts.
Psychosis Crawler.
Yeah, Psychosis Crawler. Where like, this is a combo card. I just won by drawing a bunch of cards, or something with like Niv Mizzet in play. Now, I guess in standard with Niv Mizzet decks, maybe having one of these makes sense because it's like you play Niv Mizzet, you untap, you play this, you win the game. I guess that's not standard; it's historic because Niv Mizzet's rotating. Yeah. I'm hard medium on this card. I think I've changed my mind, and this is my least favorite. And Turn Timber Symbiosis has moved up to be my 3rd favorite because I love the next 2 cards.
Let's talk about them.
Number 1, Amaria's Call. 4 white. Sorcery. Create 2 4/4 white angel warrior creature tokens with flying. Non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. And it can produce a white source on the other side. So this card does all the things you want that we've described, right? Like you play it and it creates a threat that's real. In many ways, it draws you 2 cards, at least, right? Let's say the indestructible half didn't exist, because I think that's the more stapled on flavor text. That's not true.
Yeah.
But let's just say that side didn't exist. You are getting a 7 mana 8/8 flyer that takes 2 removal spells to kill. And on its own, that's very powerful for something that's just a free land, right? You play this tapped most of the time. You play it untapped if you need to. And then 1 out of like a couple games, you draw this late game and you get giant angels into play. And now they have to defeat 2 celestial colonnades. Then add the fact that if you have anything in play that's a creature, you get a free swing into them or a free defensive like lockdown where they're all indestructible. So even if they swing at you, you're able to protect yourself. I think that's just like a lot of really valuable things on one card. I think this card's probably the most underrated of the 5. Like where, yeah, I'm going to say this is the most underrated.
I feel like from the perspective so far of like decks that are doing things where I could actually see this card having real value, Turn Timber is the best so far. And Amaria's Call is really sweet. I like this card a lot because again, you talked about the top end of, Ondu Inversion and how that card becomes like, why would all control decks not just play this card? And I feel the same way about Amaria's Call. It actually makes me feel like Amaria's Call and Ondu Inversion are both going to fit into some kind of control deck that is able to return lands to its hand. And it's just going to hit land drop after land drop after land drop. And then it's going to be like, well, I'll either return this 8 power spell to my hand, or I'll return this board wipe to my hand, and then return this 8 power spell to my hand and kill you with it. That seems like a thing that'll happen. So I think Amaria's Call is really good. I think it has to go into a little bit more of a specific build to be good. Because again, like spending 7 mana sorcery speed is like still like a tough ask,
well, but
but it is a great top deck.
It's not like Seagate Restoration, right? It's not like, oh, I spend this to play this, and then you can just attack me. It's I play this, and then you can attack me. You have 2 4/4 angels in your way, and all my block or anything else I had in play is indestructible. So I think from. And then on the aggressive side, like it's great there too, where if I'm an aggressive deck, I'm only just going to play this as a land. 99% of the time I'm going to play this as a land, but there's going to be times where I'm playing against a control deck or I'm playing against something that's able to answer all my creatures and or puts enough blockers where I get stalled out, and then I play this and I win. So I think
I think this card's sweet. I think I like what you're saying here. This card makes sense to me. So let's compare it to the final one here. We can rank them then, which is Agadeem's Awakening, which is black X sorcery. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that each have a different converted mana cost X or less.
So for instance, if you pay 3 mana into it, you get a 0-drop, a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a 3-drop.
Card is pretty freaking interesting. I think, like, generally speaking, the X return things to the battlefield spells. There's a bunch of them now. They've printed a ton in black and white over the last couple of years. I like the effects. They're usually a little hard to get all the value you want out of. They have to go into the correct build, right? Like you certainly have to make sure your deck is constructed to take advantage of drawing this card. But again, I think the fact that this is a land, you're not building the deck around the effect that Agadeem's Awakening brings you. It's not like you're hoping to draw this so you can cast it and win. I just think, like, as a resurrection spell in your deck that is also a land, even if you're getting back 1 creature, 5 mana or 6 mana to get back the creature you need, and it's a land that's getting it for you, makes this card pretty playable. Because there's a lot of shenanigans this card is going to pull off.
Yeah, there's like 3.5 use cases that I like about this. There's the one, which is what you just mentioned, right? Like, this is just a 8 mana reanimation spell. I get a 5-drop and maybe another value creature that's in my graveyard, but I get a 5-drop, and that's cool. If I draw this late game and early game, I'm just going to play it as a land. There's the version of it where there's so many, and obviously they're all late game, but there's so many aristocrats decks that are available in standard and historic that, like, the ability to cast this and get Cat back plus the devil that's a 3-drop plus your 2-drop, the sacrificing 2-drop, like any of those stuff back is like, or get a Croxa, right? Like you can get Cat, Croxa, and Mayhem Devil for 6 mana. As your end game, right? Just have this as one of those spells, and that's like insane. That's like an insane thing to have available that also is your land earlier on. And the next one is like dredge stuff. It's like similar, obviously this is more historic, but like in any of the like almost hedging crab stuff where you're self-milling with the Merfolk, the 2/1 that puts stuff into your graveyard, this lets you get all the bunch of stuff that you self-milled, putting that all into play, which I think is really powerful. But the thing for our modern listeners that I'm most excited by this card and Shatter Skull Smashing is Death Shadow. Because in Death Shadow, you want to play the land untapped. The lose 3 life untapped land is not a drawback. You're doing that all day. You're like, oh, damn. Oh, no. My life total's at 17 on turn 1. On turn 2, it's at 12. On turn 3, I have a Death Shadow. And then I draw this late game, and I can buy back the Death Shadow that you murdered.
Yeah, that's true. That is really good. And also, they're printing that new demon, that new 2-mana 1/1. We're going to talk about probably next week on the show. That is effectively another Death Shadow. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think you can play more than 1 or 2 of these, and like 1 of each maybe in that deck. But again, just having them in,
I think you can play 4 of Agadeem's Awakening and Death Shadow. That might be extreme, but like there's no cost. You just like, other than the fact that it like works with your other lands a little bit worse, and like your color fixing is worse. But like, who cares about your life total going down?
That's a significant drawback in that deck, because like you only play like 20 lands or something, or 18 lands. You're playing a very low number of lands, and most of them have to be fetch lands. You have to play like 10 or 12 fetches to make that. Maybe you play like low 20s. Well, but you play like 20 or 19.
The reason you pay the fetch lands is because you need the fetch lands to shock to get you down 3 life. This does that. So you can just pay.
And also to fix your colors. You have specific colors you're trying to hit. That's what I'm saying. I think you probably can't play 4 of this card. I think you could probably play 2, maybe 3 of this card.
Like black mana is the most important, right? Like you need to hit Kolaghan's Command, but you can get to like if you play this in a fetch, like if you play 4 of these and you subtract like 2 fetches and a swamp, and you play 3, how about that? Like you now have cut down your land count, and honestly, you could maybe even go up 1 card, like lose just a regular card for one of these. So you go up a land for this, like because remember these are spells, so like the point of these is they allow you to increase your how many lands you're playing. You don't always have to be that low. So like, because this card's insane in that deck late game and great and really good early game. I don't know. I like this card seems like and even Shatter Smashing if as a 1-of, maybe 3-1. Like I think both of them are very powerful in that deck. And like the one thing fetch lands also are good, I guess, like is Delve. Like you do not get the mill effect off of them, but so that's relevant. So it's interesting. But yeah,
I think it's cool. I think it's really cool. I mean, look, after talking about all 5 of them, I feel pretty comfortable in saying that the best one is the green one. I think the green one's the best. The black is the second best. I think white is 3rd, red is 4th, and blue is 5th.
Yeah,
would be my.
I think that's
maybe. I think green's the most powerful. I just think it fits into a strategy that green wants most of the time, and I think it just makes total sense. Yeah, mono green too. You don't have to fetch anything. You don't even care that it's not a forest. You just play 4 of them because why not?
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
could have these been legendary? I think I almost wish they were legendary. The back ends.
Yeah,
but maybe they're not. Like they're not because they're meant to be like really good. I think I'd put black. I would go black, green, white, red, blue. I think I would have black above green, but otherwise I think, they're all, and partially because I can think of a deck that this is already good in.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. Sweet. Sweet. That's it. Those are the flip cards. So after looking at all these cards is kind of our final thoughts. Will you be adding more spells? Will you be playing these instead of lands, or will you be playing these instead of spells upping your land count?
I think I'll probably be upping my land count slightly. I think probably in most cases I'll be playing 2 more lands in decks to take advantage of these cards. Unless I'm playing the type of deck that I like to play, in which case I'll probably justify playing the same number of lands, and I'll play 2 of these in place of those lands. The problem is the kind of decks I like to play, replacing lands 21 and 22 with 2 tapped lands is tough. So then as far as these untapped ones go, depends on the deck. None of these effects fit into the types of decks I like to play. None of the decks I like to play would want to play any of these cards, really. Maybe the black one. Probably the black one's the closest, because like definitely could get back Mirror Superior as part of it. That's pretty sweet. I think
the black and the red are like right up your alley. The red one like is a good is like a decent removal spell that you'll play as a land most of the time. I mean, it's red.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. It's possible. I'll definitely be considering though. These cards are great. I'm a big fan of this cycle. I think it's really cool, and I can't wait to see what happens with it.
Yeah, I think I'm on the play more land side as well. I think what these more make me want to play them as cards, and then if I need to, I can play them as lands. I'm not going to start going to like 30 lands, but then play 5 of these instead of those lands. I'm going to go up to 40 lands and play 4 spells like this instead. Yeah.
Sweet. Guys, a big thank you to everybody for listening to the show, for watching the show. Please hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already. One of the things that we really like to ask you guys to do, and I'm sure you're going to have lots of comments this time because we have brand new cards, leave a comment below. Be like, this is my favorite card. This is my ranking of those 5 we just talked about. Kessler's hair looks great. Say whatever you want to say. Leave a comment. Comments go a long way on the channel. So leave a comment, hit that like button, subscribe, and of course, follow what we're doing on Twitch. You can follow Kess at Kess Wiley. You can follow me. Well, it's actually twitch.tv/Kess Wiley, but it's twitch.tv/Ben Bateman streaming. We're both doing all kinds of fun stuff on there. And of course, go to Patreon. We already talked about that.
Patreon we talked about, but the movie talk is good. We're going to do a whole conversation about 2001 Space Odyssey next week. We talked about Lord of the Rings today versus Star Wars very briefly. Make sure to check our Commander Show next Monday. So this comes out Friday. So Monday, bringing up the calendar, Monday the 14th, we'll have Brian David Marshall, BDM, Pro Tour historian, and Ben Wheeler from Loading Ready Run, LLR, on the stream doing some Commander. So it's going to be really fun. And we hope you guys check that out as well at 7:30 p.m. PST. Thanks so much. And that's on the YouTube channel and my stream, Cass Wiley. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye, guys.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.